name, for those who don't know, is Emma Roble. I used to be the Chief Executive Officer of an organisation called Gay Advice Darlington. We were, up until 2017, an LGBT HIV sexual health organisation that worked out of Darlington across the northeast. But we started off in Darlington, working primarily and initially with gay men and men who had sex with men in the HIV setting, and then moved into a broader LGBT setting. I started off as a humble volunteer, then I became the treasurer, then secretary, then chair, then they employed me as a hate crime worker, and then I became chief executive officer, and then I shut it down. So I've got 2 decades worth of experience in the field. This will be the 3rd time that I have run an LGBT hustings on behalf of the community. And I will say queer quite a lot. I've got my swear words out in the bar, so hopefully I won't be swearing too much. I'm going to lay out a few rules, and they sum up as respect, a little bit of respect for everyone. Everyone gets a chance to say something. Everyone gets to be heard. We will not talk over each other, so you wait. Any disrespect of other people, things like pronouns, things like just calling of names, insults, leave that to me. I've got enough of those to go around. Those are the basic rules that I will apply. The agenda for today, it will be, when I get it up, waiting for the fanar jokes. Come on, get on.
You need to move.
Right, okay, so essentially opening remarks from me. Bit of a framework for the debate, which is what I'm doing now. We're going to start off with the candidates are going to say their piece. Uninterrupted, they get to say what they've prepared for on the today's criteria, which is what they feel as an individual about LGBT issues, what their party stands for on LGBT issues, and what they will bring to the role of MP. Do you get that? Yes? You okay with that? That's fine. Right. Okay. Then they get 3 minutes of that. I'll be watching the clock. So if you hear me say 30 seconds, then shut up. You know they're running out of time. It might just wind up, right? Then that's 3 minutes each. I'm going to say something about the vacuums. Of course, that's what I'm going to call these. This is the vacuum. We'll call this vacuum, Peter Gibson. This vacuum, Lola McAvoy. I've got a response from Vacuum Gibson. I've just got a vacuum from Lola McAvoy. But I've got a response from Peter. To say, I'll probably lead off with those, no, I'll finish off with those. Then after we've done that bit, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions of the candidates on what they said. At that point in time, you can then discuss your opponent's policies and procedures and what their intents are. I would be grateful if you kept it polite. This is not question time. This is not Politics Live. I'm not working for the BBC. I'm not bound by bias. And speaking of bias, I'm going to outline where I stand politically. I'm not a member of any political party. I am somewhere just off to the left of Marx and Engels. Okay? And I think, what was it I said to yourself? Right, I am a believer in revolution. I am a believer in workers' control of the means of production. I will stop just short of the bullet and the bomb at the moment. But if this was 1937, if this was the Spanish Civil War, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on the Iberian Peninsula. If you you some idea of where I stand politically. So if you're a student of politics, you've got a fair idea of what my politics are. And nobody in this election comes close to my politics. Okay? So that's where my biases are. So bottom line is, I'm going to be fair to everyone. Yes, my darling?
Can I just, for their own safety, there's a bit of water. If you like to drive, I suggest you move over a little bit.
Right. We should put the vacuum. This is a red light.
Yeah, put the
vacuum over here.
Thank you, Jane.
If the wind gets something, just tip it out.
Well, there goes the entertainment for you.
Right, okay. Files. Now, we went to great pains to persuade the Labour and the Tory candidates to attend this. We eventually, on Monday, got a reply from Peter, who initially said he was going to attend and then pulled out. So I'm going to open up with his. There's not a great deal to say about Lola McAvoy because she said nothing. There is nothing on her social media, there is nothing in her paperwork, there is nothing she's put out apart from about blue plaques and walking around the streets of Darlington, and I used to live just down the road. That's all I've seen on there. I don't know what she stands for. I don't know what she, so politically, I cannot make a comment. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out Peter's statement. And I'm going to try and not be snarky about it. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to your planned hustings. I am sorry not to be able to join you. Election campaigns are an incredibly busy time. There are over 45,000 doors to reach and almost 70,000 voters. I am spending as much time as humanly possible getting out onto those doorsteps to speak to people, just as I have every week over the last 4.5 years. Sorry. I have agreed to attend one public hustings, which is taking place on Thursday evening at 6:30, and have declined several other invites. I'm going to be asking about that later, but there we go. Right. As Darlington's first gay MP and the only gay candidate in Darlington at this election, I believe on that my record on the issues that specifically you speak to, I believe that my record on the issues that specifically matter to you speak for themselves. My husband of 16 years, with whom I shared my life for over 30 years and who is also involved in public services, have both witnessed unprecedented changes in the Conservative Party since the early 1990s. I have been proud to be amongst the group of Conservative MPs who have been championing a ban on the abuse of conversion practices since first being elected to the Parliament. This proved to be a difficult thing to secure, which I remain committed to doing all I can in Parliament to secure it. Indeed, when I resigned my post in government, I referenced the then Prime Minister's lack of progress on that issue. I have worked extremely closely with the Terence Higgins Trust. Do you know who the Terence Higgins Trust are? I'll take general notes. A cause I have supported over many years to help ensure the diagnosis of opt-out HIV testing, which has been groundbreaking in diagnosing unknown cases. I think what he means is late diagnoses in that, but ensuring people are treated and which will help to deliver our target of zero new transmission by 2030. My party is one that has brought about equal marriage, again something I could challenge you on, because if memory serves, it was carried by the Labour and the Liberal and the Greens and the Scottish National Party, and most of the Tory party didn't vote for it, but that's just on the voting record, so that's a point of fact. And as I recently accepted the highly respected Atherton Review, and the PM issued an apology on behalf of the government for the horrendous discrimination prior to 2000. Armed forces, basically the government being total homophobic bastards. Oops, I swore, for a while. As a member of the All-Party Group on Global LGBT Equality, and as part of the delegation from the UK, God, he goes on, doesn't he? In the UK, I recently visited Ghana ahead of their anti-LGBT legislation to share my views with the Ghanaian parliamentarians. With over 70 countries in the world where being gay is an offence, and where the death penalty still exists, increasing discrimination and anti-LGBT legislation in the Western African countries, we must never give up the fight for equality for others around the world. We have also seen reform of fertility precision and the removal of the ban on blood donations by gay men, gay and bisexual men, and men who want sex with men. Over recent years, we have seen dreadful toxic battle over the rights of trans people. Recognising trans people and eliminating discrimination is important. And as a person with trans family members in my own family, I feel very personal. As your MP, I have sought to serve everyone in the community to the best of my ability, respecting their views, but staying true to my values. Should I be re-elected on the 4th of July, I will continue to serve you all in the same way. I'm not going to dissect that. I could, but I'm not. Right. I'm going to have a 30-second silence for Lola McAvoy to hear what she had to say. That's new. It's a lot of nothing. So, I suppose I ought to let the candidates introduce themselves. So, bear with me 2 seconds. Right, so, today, we don't have Peter, we don't have Lola. We do have Matthew, we do have Simon, and we do have Michael. They're going to introduce themselves, so who wants first dibs?
Go on, I'll go first.
Right, okay. Matthew, you have, hang on, let me set the clock up. Get talking.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank the organisers for tonight's evening. I was, do you want me to stand up? I've been told to stand up.
You can stand
up.
then.
Go for it. Yeah. Thank the organisers for arranging tonight's event. I was fortunate enough to be at a previous event run at another venue, and I learned so much. I was very much a case of my ears were open far more than my mouth was. So if you're lucky, the same might be happening again tonight. We talk a lot about the cost of living crisis, but in the Green Party we talk about it being an equality crisis. So as far as money is concerned, we're far too unequal a country as far as where the money is. We're the 6th richest country on the planet, but where is all the money? When you look around, does it feel like that? When it comes to LGBT rights, we're exactly the same. We want equality. We don't want to favour one group over the other. We mourn the fact that groups in our society who have every right to exist and have existed throughout human history are marginalised, demonised, and I would go as far as almost killed by the state because of the disrespect and the failure to give members of this community the support that they need. So LGBT rights are human rights, and without human rights we're little more than animals. And that's why, as a Green Party, we're proud to have many members of our party who are LGBT. We have a very firm stance on trans rights, that trans men are men, trans women are women, and other gender identities are possible and valid. And as a prospective parliamentary candidate, a prospective MP, I will continue to use my powers to support others, because power is nothing if you keep it for yourself, You need to use your ability to influence and change society for those who aren't able to help themselves. I've lived in the town for 23 years, just over. I chose to move to the northeast. My children are growing up in this lovely town that we call Darlington, and it's meeting young people and having thought about my childhood in comparison to their child. You always think things are going to get better. You always hope that the world is going to be more equal and fairer. I grew up under Clause 28. I know teachers who would have been sacked if they just mentioned that they were gay. I knew teachers who put their jobs on the line helping fellow students as they came to terms with their identity, whether that be sexuality or gender. And those brave, principled professionals who stuck two fingers up to the government and said, I will risk my career because Clause 28 is so bad, is something I see repeating now with the trans community, and we are drifting into another Clause 28 situation for our trans friends. Thank you very much.
Three minutes is not a long time, is it? Used to joke, it takes me more than 3 minutes to say hello. I think it's my love of music, classical and progressive rock, that means I spend far too much time talking and far little time saying anything. Who wants to go next? Michael?
Yeah.
Gam? No, you're off.
Hello everybody, my name is Michael Walker. I'm the Reform UK candidate for the general election. Our party doesn't really have very many specific LGBTQ policies, but I'd like to just talk a little bit about me for a second and then talk about the policies that I think would help the community. I'm born and raised in Darlington. I was born in Greenbank Hospital. Then I lived in Clifton Road, went to Skern Park School. I'm not getting naked, it's not really
Okay.
But yeah, maybe later. And I went to Skern Park Primary School. Then I went to Houndgate, then I went to Queen Elizabeth Sixth Form College. And at that point, I was introduced to the LGBTQ community in Darlington. And I hope I've been a good ally for that community during my time in Darlington. I then moved to Korea and worked as a teacher in Korea, and I also helped local LGBTQ charities there who are probably experiencing the same kind of discrimination that our community in the UK experienced 50 years ago. So I did my best to try and help the people in Korea. Then I moved back. During that time I was a member of, before that I was a member of the Green Party, then I moved and became a member of the Liberal Party, then I became a member of the Conservative Party, and now I'm a member of the Reform Party, so I do like to spread myself around a little bit. And then, yes, now I'm standing for election, and some of the policies that I think you will like are things like taking the lowest paid out of income tax. I believe that might be something that might be quite useful for people in the audience. Also, we are looking at, as Matthew mentioned, the cost of living. We're trying our hardest to reduce the amount of money that the government takes from your pay packet, which I do believe would be beneficial to you. So we're looking to reduce fuel duty by 20 pence per litre. We're also looking to scrap VAT on energy, which I think will go a long way to helping with the cost of living. Alongside those things, we're also looking to protect young children and safeguard children, and also protect women's rights as well. We're also looking at trying to create a society that respects and cherishes all views in society by making sure that freedom of expression, freedom of speech are respected in this country, so we all have the chance to
30 seconds.
Thank you. The chance to voice our opinions without fear of any kind of reprisals. Regarding Darlington itself, if I'm elected as your MP, I'm really looking to bring communities like this together with other communities and starting to try to create or introduce or develop new community centres in the town, because I think that's something that could be beneficial to everybody in this audience. I think I may have forgotten things, but you can ask me questions and things like that.
Wind up.
Thank you very much. So yes, that's me. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me as well. Thank you. I should mention that earlier.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Last but not least.
Well, hopefully not least. We'll soon find out. Good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Thorley. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for Darlington MP. It's great to be here this evening. Thanks for inviting me. I'm particularly proud to be standing for the Liberal Democrats because I think our record when it comes to LGBTQ rights is second to none. For many decades we have been at the forefront of expanding, protecting and helping to spread the rights of people across society, but as I said, with a particular focus I think on LGBTQ. We were the driving force behind the 1967 Act, which decriminalised homosexuality amongst men. We were the driving force in the 1970s. We were the first political party to propose Equality Acts, which would have prevented discrimination on grounds of sexuality. Throughout the existence of Section 28, we campaigned against it. We were the driving force, I use the word again, behind the introduction of civil partnerships in the early 2000s, and then again for the introduction of marriage equality in the coalition years. Having said that, there's still work to be done, and I'm also really pleased that what we're proposing in our manifesto this time will continue to protect and extend rights, protect the Human Rights Act, which is under threat from the Conservatives, and our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights, which is also under threat, to extend further recognition to non-binary people, to remove the need for medical certificates for people who want to change their gender legally, and also to, generally speaking, focus much more on the rights of the individual. Being pro-LGBTQ comes very easily to us because fundamental to our beliefs, the most fundamental belief we have, quite honestly, is that everybody should have the ability to follow the path that they want to follow through life. That's what liberalism is. It's not about imposing a vision. It's not about deciding for other people what they should be doing. It's about putting in place legal rights, putting in place practical support so that people can do what they want to do with their lives.
30 seconds.
That's my guiding principle as well, as an individual, as well as the party. I am liberal in tooth and claw. What you'll get from me if I'm elected is a real focus on building consensus. We cannot have long-term improvements in Darlington without a consensus. Political parties come and go, but the people stay. And we will work to establish that and hopefully have a long-term impact far beyond the next election and the election after that.
Wind up.
And I have wound up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was so remarkably well behaved.
That's young.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, they've all said their piece. Now, this is an opportunity for direct interrogation by yourselves, because I mean I could start dissecting, but I'm going to resist at the moment. I'm going to open the floor for questions. Now, if you can couch your questions so that all the parties can answer in some shape or form, I'd be grateful, but if you can't, I will then try and edge it in the direction so that they can. So, anybody want to open up the firing shots for the firing squad? Sorry, the panel. Any volunteers want to ask any of them anything?
I'm a teacher in Darlington.
Yes.
And I see every day students being not persecuted, but being bullied, being picked on because of their genders. What are your parties, what are your policies to help young people in education to create a more equal society?
Who wants to open up with that one? Not the Greens first, because the Greens went first last time. So anybody
Why
on this side?
don't we just rotate the order? So whoever's first, then
Yes.
So Michael was second last time, so Michael goes first this time. That's fair.
That seems reasonable to me. I think consensus between three parties. You know, though. There you go.
Thank you. I'm also a teacher as well. I teach at a school in North Yorkshire, and we experience the same issues of bullying there as well. Our party's policy on education is really to give teachers the tools and really to let teachers teach and do what they're meant to do. And when disruptive behaviour like that happens or bullying happens in a school, we would expect the schools to take a zero tolerance approach to it and discipline the children who are causing that bullying to that effect. But no matter what the bullying is, no matter if they're making fun of their race, their sexuality or anything like that, that would be exactly how we would go regarding that. At my school, it's a small school, so we can manage it quite well, that kind of bullying, because it is a very small school, and I can only imagine the difficulties there is that are you at a secondary school? Secondary school with large class sizes and large student bodies, it must be very difficult. When I worked in Bishop Auckland, I worked at a school in Bishop Auckland, and yeah, it's teachers need the help. Teachers absolutely need the help, because they've got to teach and then they've got to manage the class and they've got to deal with other issues as well, with social work and all those kinds of things. So that's what our party would do, would be to provide the help that's needed to stop that kind of bullying in the West.
Very relevant question, I think, and just in general in education, there's a number of issues which have been brought to my attention by teachers that I've been speaking to throughout this campaign. Quite frankly, most of them come down to a question of resources and the fact that school budgets have been cut in real terms over the past decade, which perhaps the Conservatives would care to defend if they bother turning up. However, what we plan to do is not just to look at this in terms of financial resources, but also the human resources too. So one of our proposals is to ensure that there is a mental health professional stationed in every school, so that obviously we don't want to see any bullying at all, but if people are suffering and poor mental health as a consequence of anything happening in school or out of school, they have someone there who will be able to provide them with specialist support. But beyond that, it's a question, without any sense of irony, of education. If people are being bullied, rather than if students are bullying because of the gender identity or the sexuality of their fellow students, why are they doing that? It's because the society in which they exist has not provided them with an education which allows them to see the individual and to have that kind of respect. And if I had a simple answer to that, then I would say it, but it is a complicated thing. And I don't want to blame schools for this, because I think schools in general try very hard and do a very good job in stamping out bullying. I think that's something which has improved massively, quite frankly, over the past 20 to 30 years. However, there are limits to what schools can achieve, and what we need is this societal shift, which will come through a much broader approach. And as I said, what we've focused on for many, many years is expanding individual rights and ensuring that people are granted the respect that they are due across society. So there's no simple solution to it, I'm afraid. That's the honest answer.
Milton?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, really good question. A member of my family suffered horrendous bullying at school because of sexuality and gender identity, and to be fair, the school's awful at it. This one school was poorly led, and the way it was handled was terrible. It had a huge effect on the family members' mental health, and just to make a full house, the CAMS support in that part of the country was also dreadful. So, as Simon said, this starts with a society where it's considered okay to bully, it's okay to ostracise people and other people because they're not like me. That idea that you don't have a duty to your community to care and encompass all beliefs and all lifestyles. And so, yeah, as Simon said, that needs to stop. And unfortunately, there are people with power to influence who are using it for ill, whether that be in the media or in politics or influencing online. And that needs to be stamped out, and those people need to be deplatformed, because they're spreading hate, and that hate is dangerous. It affects people's lives and it leads to death. I'll be quite blunt about that, knowing the death toll of how people are being bullied. Schools are underfunded massively. The capital funding is poor, so schools are in bad state of affairs. You're working in poor work conditions. The pay of teachers is also poor. It's fallen again in real terms. So, in a capitalist society which we're enforced to live in, where money is worth, teachers are being told every year you're worth less and less, and that's wrong. But as far as resources within the school, that in addition to filling those teacher vacancies, which many schools have, Simon and I, we share that policy of a mental health professional in schools that can do a broader reach, because I'm not excusing bullying, but when someone lashes out at someone, there's quite often a reason for it. Have they heard it at home? Have they been influenced by other people, or is it sometimes a cry for help? And I know that might sound a bit liberal, a bit minded, but if you find the root cause of why someone is being an absolute shit, you might be able to stop them being quite so shitty from time to time. The other thing, as I mentioned Clause 28 earlier, and we may well cover this later, but my fear is that teachers are now being put under a duty. The CAS review is suggesting that teachers must out children to parents. And my response to that is, if that child doesn't feel safe telling their parents that they're trans, it's probably a really good reason for that. And you outing them forcibly is really dangerous. And also the idea of social transition, which can be as little or as big as you as an individual want it to be, because it's your identity we're talking about here. The idea that should somehow be stopped is again also challenging. And the fact that teachers are having to police that and are worried that they may be receiving a poor Ofsted or a criticism for doing this, which is fundamentally wrong, is a big concern. So teachers do a great job with limited resources, and I want you to be able to do a better job with the right resources.
Would you like a response?
Yeah, I totally understand where everyone's coming from. I'd just like to say, as a teacher, I'm not in it for the pay. I'm not in it, and to be quite honest, I get quite a lot of holidays, so that compensates me for the pay. What we need is more time to plan, more time to support the pupils. I don't have time in the day to, if someone comes for help, quite often I can't help them because I don't have enough time. If I was just given more time and more planning, I would be able to be a more supportive and a more approachable teacher to help young people. But I do like the idea of a mental health nurse or practitioner would be absolutely fantastic in every single school.
Anybody else want to come back on that particular topic?
I was just going to ask you, what's your teaching load at your school? How many hours a week are you teaching?
I'm part-time. I work 4 days a week.
Right, okay, yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You need, yes, you're absolutely right. You need more time to do the actual job you're employed to do.
Yeah.
Really, yeah, definitely.
I'm going to ask a question to maybe clarify a few points. Hands up if you've heard of the CAS review. Yay!
Is that Full House?
Almost. Hands up if you know what Section 28 was. Yay! Does that mean I don't have to explain it? Do you know the implications of what Kerry Badenoch is suggesting within the gender identity policy review that they're doing for schools? It's not the CAS review that's recommended.
No, sorry.
It's the actual policy that was suggested for gender identity within schools and teaching of gender identity in schools. Suggesting, and they have said within their policy I just happen to have a whole set of notes here. I'm not going to read them out in thing, but it's essentially Kemi Badenoch vowed to change the wording in the Equality Act. The manifesto also vows to implement further laws that would effectively deny non-binary people the right to have their gender identity legally recognised by codifying that an individual can only have one sex in the eyes of the law. It goes on to promise that legislation would force teachers in the UK to follow guidance recently published by schools, which effectively ban any discussion of gender identity in schools and forcibly out any student. Now, anybody here know anything about safeguarding? Right. What are the incumbent impact of telling parents of, shall we say, extremist religious fundamentalist viewpoints that their kid is actually not what they think it is? What would the impact be?
We can completely break down that relationship between child and parent, and also child and teacher, because the teacher is someone they've trusted with that really personal news. That fundamental relationship between that trusted teacher and that pupil can be destroyed.
But safeguarding is based on the fact you've never promised a child you will keep a secret.
Exactly. Yes.
You have to make the right people be available to that child. So if you already knew as a teacher or as a pastoral care that child was at danger, the likelihood would be that it would already on an at-risk register. So the idea that there are legions of families willing to hurt their children emotionally, physically, whatever, because they decide that they wish to identify, I think you need to give us some real facts and data on that.
You cannot, as a teacher, you cannot say to a child, this is going to be a secret, it's not going to go any further.
The bottom line of the safeguarding guidance and safeguarding regulations, if a child is at risk or in risk of causing risk, you must tell the relevant authorities.
Yeah.
But the relevant authorities aren't necessarily the parents.
This is not a safeguarding issue, though. You just cannot keep a secret with a child. And
Do you want? Here's an example of a factual account that happened that I actually was heavily involved in a safeguarding review that involved a child being removed from the parents. A child came out to a school, not in Darlington, but somewhere in the northeast, up by sort of Peterlee direction. She came out as a bisexual to a teacher. This was a Catholic school. The teacher went and told the parents. The parents then proceeded to try and get this child dealt with by taking them for therapy. Once this therapy was, this child didn't know what to do. They came for support, and social services intervened because the child was deemed to be in danger from the parents. The child went back to that school whilst not with the parents. The members of that child's family then ran over the child with a car. She ended up in a wheelchair because of her sexual orientation at the end of the day. So you've got the at-risk element is true, but you've got to view the way the risk is. The number of kids who turned up on the doorstep of GAD over the years that I worked there, we used to call it the 4 o'clock rule. Friday 4 o'clock, Friday after 4 o'clock, services closed down. We get somebody on the doorstep, bin bag, hold all, I've told my mum and dad I'm gay, and got kicked out. That happened so many times. From Gypsy Roma travellers to families who you thought were really cool and okay.
But the fundamental question here is how is that even relevant really to the question of a child telling their teacher that they are perhaps trans or a particular sexuality? Because that is not something which is really anybody's business. And this is where I don't understand why Kemi Badenoch has brought this in at all. Because this isn't the same. She's putting this in the same sort of category as a child disclosing to a teacher that something, untoward has happened in that child's life.
Yeah, sexual abuse.
She's trying to portray this kind of disclosure, saying to your teacher, I think I might be trans, or whatever it may be, in the same sort of category of saying, I have been abused at home, or I've been abused in my sports team, or whatever it may be. And it's blatantly obvious that that's what Badenoch is trying to do with this proposed legislation. She's trying to equate the two things together.
She's trying to see that a teacher confronted by a trans pupil has a problem to deal with.
Has a problem to deal with.
I better warn the parents about this problem, that their child is trans.
Exactly.
Now, if a child was confiding in this, and also confided they were worried about how do they come out to their parents. Now that is pastoral care, and I could understand that teacher will be able to coach them if they felt that this was something they wanted to do, and like, well, I'm really worried about it. That's pastoral care, but not the first reaction. This is a problem that needs dealing with. I better warn the parents.
If you tell me about this, then I am duty bound to tell you. Where's that come from? Well, and it's come from a position, basically, of transphobia, hasn't it? I mean, that this is the new conservative peril, really. That's the perception they have, and it's, to my mind, it's as clear as day what they're trying to achieve with that, and it should be completely resisted at every possible opportunity.
What are they trying to achieve?
What is Badenoch trying to achieve by doing this? Well, as I said, she's trying to portray being trans, because let's be honest, 30 years ago they focused on, they were homophobes, and times have moved, and so they've had to move their prejudices with the times, with a certain degree of irony. And now they're trying to, or Badenoch is trying to present a child or a student, not a young person, it could well be, not a child, saying to their teacher, I think I may be trans, as Matthew says, a problem that needs to be solved. This is a troublesome disclosure. This is potentially a safeguarding issue which the child has disclosed to the teacher. That's what she's trying to present it as. And I fundamentally reject that.
Do you not think your own prejudices are clouding your judgment?
Can't hear what you're saying, Michael.
Sorry, do you not think your own prejudices are clouding your judgment on what you think she's saying? Because from what you just read out, I didn't take all of that.
Why do you think this duty is being proposed for teachers?
No idea. I'm not telling you that much. I have no idea.
Well, I said, why do you think?
No idea.
You've got no idea.
No idea.
But you think I'm prejudiced.
No, I'm just asking you a question.
I think
I have an opinion. You don't have an opinion on it. This isn't a discussion, is it? It's like you have an opinion. I've outlined my opinion. I think that they have moved. I think they have moved from being homophobes, and they were homophobes. This is a matter of absolute fact. The Conservative Party in the 1990s, 1980s, however far you want to go back, they were homophobes, and they've been forced to move with the times. And to give Peter his due, thank you, Peter, for turning up today, there have been members within the Conservative Party who have pushed that forward, and that should be recognised. And society as a whole has moved so far. You know, in my lifetime, which isn't that long, we've seen an absolute revolution in terms of gay rights.
But my concern is that the dog whistle power of transphobia is being used by a cohort that are worried they're going to lose control, because it's all about control and power. And so they're trying to, again, what you do, you create a fear, you create anger, you create suspicion, and then say, once you've created it, but I'm the solution for that one. You know, like so many other prejudices. Rally round my flag, you're worried by this thing I just told you worried about.
That to me implies a degree of planning, which I think is
I think it's innate within the modus operandi of the Conservative Party to create those pressure points. And so you've acknowledged that we've moved so far on rights within the LGBT community, but the fear is we can always slip back. You know, the freedom, what is it, the cost of freedom is ever constant vigilance. Someone will correct me on the quote, but the fear is, yeah, go on, thank you. Give me 5 out of 10 for that one. But the fear is that if the ratchet slips backwards, you know, where would it go back? We're already seeing in the States where the same accounts, the same influencers who are massively anti-trans and try to cancel trans culture are now going for reproductive rights and trying to ban contraception. They're now talking about women's votes. It's the same thing. Create a fear, and then don't worry, I've got the solution now. I've got you all fearful. So yeah, that was a really good question, and it opened it up beautifully.
I just think that making a blanket comment like that conservatives are homophobes is kind of
I didn't make a blanket comment that Conservatives are homophobes. I said the Conservative Party was homophobic.
Yes, I know.
I didn't say they are homophobic now,
That's-
but it's a matter of historical record
That's
that the Conservative Party, in the however far back you want to go, up to about 10 years ago, could be said to be institutionally homophobic. That's not in any respect something that you can really push back on, as far as I'm concerned. It was a homophobic party.
I just feel that it's kind of defeats the object of why we're here today when you make
Can
that
we
kind
just
of
sort of roll that one up because you're talking in circles, kids?
Sorry.
Do the panel distinguish the difference though between a child who, I would wonder why a child would feel the need to tell a teacher about their sexuality or about feeling uncomfortable about being a particular sex. I would wonder why that conversation was going on. And would they then see that there might be a difference between a child who talks about their sexuality, about their feelings for somebody, the same sex or both sexes, or bisexual, or because they feel they would need to establish themselves as having a different identity in terms of their sex? I see those two things as very different, sexual orientation and what's called gender identity. And I think in schools they generally see those things as very different. Just wonder what the panel think about that in terms of safeguarding.
That a little bit? You see it's very different. I understand what you mean because, I mean, having spent the best part of 2.5 decades working in the field around sort of sexual orientation, gender identity, sexual health, etc., and as an educator within that arena, I've always separated out gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity, and sex. They're all very complicated things. They all sit on very different lines, very different spectrums. But from the perspective of when you're looking at, say, within a school environment, any number of reasons would happen why a disclosure would happen. Examples would be a lot of PHSE type filler. Is it still called PHSE?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
PHSE type filler happens in the summer months as schools start winding down. They've got bugger all else to do that they can do with the kids. No disrespect, but that's the response I got from the head of a local school, saying, look, right, they call it enrichment fortnight, is it? Where different organisations get invited to talk about drugs, talk about sex, talk about sex education. Sounds like one of my talks in schools, to be honest. I was brought in on a number of occasions to certain schools to talk around homophobic bullying, transphobic bullying, sexual orientation, gender identity, and quite frequently what would happen after a session that I'd run, and I'd end up, I don't defend you being victim of one of mine, but I would do 20 kids, 30 minutes, 6 times in a day. Literally bang, 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 bang. By the end of it, I'd forgotten which jokes I'd said to which groups. I was a babbling wreck. So the ones that got at the end of it probably got more entertainment than they got anything else. There would be, I know for a fact there were disclosures at the end of that. And under what's used to be called the GILIC, or the Fraser competencies, once you're over 13, then when you talk about sexual orientation and contraception, parents have got fuck all idea. They've got nothing to do with it. It's to do with the child. If a child passes the Fraser competency.
In a 20-minute session, I'd be surprised if you could assess
No,
that though.
No, you light your fuse. You start talking about what love is, what it feels like to love someone and not be able to express it openly in public, what it feels like to walk down the street and hold your partner's hand in public and not have to look over your shoulder and wait for the first punch in the back of your head, because that's the environment that I grew up in. What's it like to sort of know that your relationship is against the law somewhere in the world? Those are risk assessments. So when you have those general discussions, kids think, you know that as well as I do, kids think deep and hard. And with the world of social media, they need something like me to teach them about it. But sort of pulling out the separation is there around gender identity. I think my issue is why single that out?
Because if you wish to pursue a gender identity that's different to your sex, generally it's taken that you would then wish to be acknowledged in that sex, because the affirmation only comes from other people around you. That would mean the rest of the community...
That's social transition.
Yes. That could be a safeguarding issue for a child if a parent wasn't involved in it. Maybe the child actually was actually very autistic and their point of reference was not in gender identity, but they become confused. What if they suffer trauma? If you have any reading of what
the issue here is, I hear what you're saying, and there's always scope for safeguarding. There's always scope for safeguarding issues. What we're talking about here with the Badenoch proposals is there is no discretion. The teacher is not assessing it for a safeguarding issue. The teacher is obliged, apropos of nothing, to pass on the things that the student is saying to the parents, and in only this very narrow spectrum of disclosures. Now, there's only one reason for that. It's not to do with safeguarding. Because if it were to do with safeguarding, it would recognise that someone is making an analysis there, the teacher in this case, or even better, a specialist within the school, who the teacher can go to for advice if necessary, so on and so forth. But it's not doing that. It's saying it is literally going back to the old Section 28 days and removing any sort of discretion or nuance from the situation.
There is discretion. You do not have to inform the parents in every instance. There will be clear guidance on it.
That's not what the guidance has been put out.
If you just read the manifesto, you're reading a headline. If you actually look through the gender questioning guidance, the draft, the consultation,
I've read it.
Yes.
I've read the CAS review as well.
It still has not been decided on. It might never be decided on if the Conservative Party don't the Labour don't.
The question you asked was the question you asked was why would a child disclose that to a teacher? That shows we've got really good pastoral care in teaching, that there's that bond. They see the teacher as a reasonable and reliable person to talk to. That conversation does not necessarily need to be a call for help. That conversation does not need to be a need to act. It could be just that person questioning, and questioning is okay in a safe place, and it doesn't have to go any further unless that child feels a need to discuss it further. And so, generally my rule is the kids are all right, and if they have the care around them and the society around them that accepts the wide variety that we wonderful, crazy species that we are can do, then that's a school and a teacher doing well.
Okay, I'm going to place a pause because we're going to have a slight break. Okay, not for any other reason than I need to go for a piss. And we can take a bit of a breather. If you have a question that you want to ask and you don't want to ask it, there are pieces of paper that you can ask and pass on to Jane, and she will do that. Now, I want to thank Jane and Phoenix Trans, because they're the people that have done the legwork for this. I'm the gobshite at the front doing the talking, okay? So I'm the one who gets the punches, they get the glory, because they're the ones that have organised this, okay? I'm just the gobshite. So I need to go to the Kazi. Come for breaks time, get yourself a bevy, whatever, come back. I've got a question. What we've got here is an opportunity for community questions. Now, you may or may not be aware, but an awful lot of the community have said, right, okay, is this a safe place to be? Are we safe to come here? Which actually speaks volumes about the state of the nation as it stands now. I was reading an article online last night, this morning, about 3 o'clock to be brutally honest. The United Nations Women's Council have made a statement about the nature of the gender critical movement. They've also, the Special Rapporteur last year made a statement about concerns about the human rights of LGBTQIA people within the UK as a situation now. And as a country that as little as 6 years ago was in the top 2 nations for LGBT rights and equal rights and human rights, sat at the top, we've sort of gone down a very slippery slope to going down to be almost, not at the bottom, but we've really dropped down in terms of the scale to the point where the Court of Human Rights, where the United Nations, we're being scrutinised for not being what we should be. I mean, I'll ask you a question. What does it mean to be British to the world outside?
Depends where you live.
Right. I'll quote some of my American friends. Right? It's all fair, jolly good, fair play. Let's all join in and be jolly decent to each other and whatever. You know, pip pip. You know, that's the image that we portray outside. And to be honest, when Americans come over here and find out that we all don't talk like Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins,
Nobody speaks like Vic does.
No. Yes. And we all live in castles and such things as that. But the concerns are, I mean, since I left Gate Vice Darlington and closed it down, and my heart was broken by that, because I got the job that I was born for, and that was taken away from me by the fact that funding cuts had been hacked and slashed. Local authorities had lost 50% of their funding within a 6-year period, and they'd made decisions, and they always make the easier decisions, and apparently HIV gay men's services were an easy service to cut, equalities was an easy service to cut, youth services an easy service to cut. So the incumbent thing is, we're now living in a situation, in a culture whereby people are frightened of kids. There are no kids services. Where are the kids services? They're talking about let's invest in kids now. Why did they cut them in the first place? I've been around too long and I've seen the same circle. I became able to vote the year that Thatcher came to government. That's how old I am.
To be fair, they did bail out the banks, and you have to make these choices. They did choose to keep the banks going, didn't they?
I'd have done what Iceland would have done. Right?
Yeah.
What Iceland
Yes.
did. I'd have put the bankers in fucking prison. Because instead of giving the guy who was in charge of RBS, who was one of the prime fucking movers.
You heard of too big to fail? It was too big to jail. That was the
Yeah, a friend of mine wrote a song about that. Right, now I've got a bunch of questions. Now, are there anybody here with questions? Like, I know somebody else has a question. Like, you go for it, Ethan.
I want to swing us to the NHS a little bit. So I'm senior management for a private hospital company, but we're governed by the NHS. We're governed by NHS policy because we can't set our own, because we're not governed by
Are you governed by the NHS constitution?
We're not. We have our own separate constitution, but we have to go by their guidelines and policies, because we're not governed by the World Health Organization, the UNHC, and things like that. And one of the strangest things we do is we bring patients in, and whether they're male, female, anything else, postmenopausal, premenopausal, we have to force upon them a pregnancy test. And there's other systems like this that kind of deny people the opportunity to express themselves and say, well, no, I can't be pregnant, or no, this isn't my identity, and they have to identify by the standard sexes. I want to know what the other parties would do to kind of help healthcare work to remove that prejudice, where you can tell us, yes, I was born a female, but I don't identify like that, my systems don't work like that, please don't force a pregnancy test on me, please don't force me to tell you this, because this is information that isn't kept to the doctors, it goes as high as me, and I'm essentially an admin.
Would be like I said to the doctor when they sent me for my asked for my very first cervical smear at the age of 35. I had to point out that I have not got a cervix, I've never had a cervix, and I'm never likely to grow one.
Yes, and that's information we have to force out of people, and I know it happens in NHS facilities, and I don't personally think that's right. I'd like to know how anybody would care to reform healthcare so that we're not asking stupid questions that are making us look like fools and making people feel uncomfortable.
So, right.
please word that in a way that
I am looking for a way to put that into something less specific, more or less specific.
I'm on 3 hours sleep. I really can't make things vague.
You're a youngster. You should be able to run on an hour's sleep. Sleep at work. That's what it's for. But essentially,
You go to union if you're working too many hours, mate.
Privatisation.
You know a union, huh?
I do. I'm his agent.
Wrong industry.
okay. I mean, so in terms of are we not talking about equalities questions? Are we talking about healthcare questions?
Making healthcare accessible for people of the community is essentially what I want to know, how they want to do it, because it's
Okay, we'll start with accessible healthcare for the community without stupid questions, or whatever stupid questions they may be pertaining to. Go.
Yeah.
Go.
You
said
it sounds like just a classic case of NHS bureaucracy, really, more than anything else. That it's quite hidebound in terms of you must follow this particular process. This is the process, and it must be followed because it is the process, and that's all there is to it.
I think the issue is, as a private healthcare provider, we are a business, so we can't set our own health policies.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be governed by what the NHS tells us to do. Which
So if what you're saying is, if you were doing this same service in the NHS, you'd be following the same process, right? So
we just charge them for it.
Yeah, so it's not that you're private that's the issue; it's the policy, and then you're having to follow it as well. But the problem is that anybody is having to do this, whether NHS or private. I think the question of the NHS bureaucracy is one as old as the NHS, quite honestly, and I don't really see this as being fundamentally different from any other aspects relating to that. I can understand why guidelines like this are in place, at least theoretically. Obviously, it would depend on the precise medical circumstances under discussion, which I'm not going to claim to have any expertise on whatsoever. But it sounds like it just requires a little bit of flexibility and discretion being applied to the people on the front line who actually are the ones posing these questions on a case-by-case basis, right? I mean, I don't think anyone can say, well, it's always got to be this way, or it's never got to be this way. It has to be based on some sort of understanding that the people posing these questions are doing it for a good reason, but perhaps they should have some additional discretion over what it is they're saying. Is that something which can be implemented easily? Probably not, quite honestly. I mean, you're dealing with a very large organisation that has rules, and it has rules to ensure consistency of service. And one of the great advantages of the NHS, it has downsides as well, let's not sugarcoat it, but one of the great advantages of the NHS is it is able to provide services on scale because it standardises. And so if you start chipping away at that, it's going to introduce additional cost, and that's all got to be paid for one way or the other. So I don't really have a succinct answer to that. I don't think there is a simple answer to it, but ultimately I, as a liberal, would always say, let's judge each case as much as possible on a case-by-case basis and have some discretion built into the system there, rather than a one-size-fits-all kind of approach.
I'm not going to claim any deep insight or knowledge, but thank you for the question. As Simon said, we've got an NHS that operates at scale, and in order to do that, practitioners need to have confidence that they are safe following the rules. For two reasons. One, for professional reasons, if those rules protect them, because that means that they are following the correct procedure, that's great, and it needs to protect, obviously, the patient as well. And so we really need to come down to a harms reduction. Everything needs to look at the harms that following them or not following them may produce. We've already talked about opt-out HIV testing briefly in your introduction there. And why was that introduced? And that was from a harms reduction basis. It was a very sound reason that came in. I'm not going to pretend that I know the ins and outs of pregnancy testing and whether that should be opted in or opted out. But it's a case of, should we blindly trust a decision made by the NHS on a certain date in the past and never change it? Of course not. They should be reviewed. They should be reviewed by professionals. We have National Institute of Care and Health Excellence. I think NICE for short, isn't it?
It feels like dyslexic, the NHS is.
Yes. And while it doesn't get everything right all the time, from my understanding, speaking to practitioners, it gets the vast majority of things right the vast majority of the time. So if there's a reason to review pregnancy testing for patients, let's review it. If it meets the harm reduction threshold, let's do it. If it complicates things unnecessarily administratively, can we streamline it? But if removing it adversely affects the patient, then we should keep it. So from a position of ignorance, which I'll be completely honest about, I hate politicians who pretend they know what they're talking about, I would say it sounds like it may well be the decision is based on harms reduction, and if the admin could be streamlined then and save costs, then that's all great.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in agreement with Simon, there does seem to be an awful lot of waste and unnecessary bureaucracy regarding those kind of things. And what we need to do, similar to, as I mentioned to the lady who works in a school, is we need to listen to people on the front line in these hospitals and in these schools and start to get ideas from them about how these services can be improved. So we're not, as Matthew said, we're not using ideas and practices that were made at a certain point in time, but we're taking everything in the round and making sure that savings are made in the NHS, because there's an awful lot of waste that is happening there that we could get rid of and then provide better services for people throughout it all. And regarding private healthcare as well, I think that there should be more autonomy for them to do what they think is best for their patients. That's how I feel about it.
I think in this case it's private healthcare, but it's under contract to the NHS, right?
So we're not contracted to the NHS. The issue is, because private healthcare providers can't set their own policies on providing healthcare, which makes no sense. We're governed by the NHS, which means we follow the NHS's. They have a special name. They're overpaid workers who tell you whether you're being nice enough to people. Their rules on whether or not we're being equal, whether we're being fair, which I don't know if there's any nurses here tonight, leads to a pile of paperwork like this before you can even talk to a patient. You work in healthcare?
Yes.
Do you understand what I'm on about? You get 600 sheets of paper before you can go and talk to your patient.
Yeah.
Well, it must be a certain So we have piles and piles of paperwork, because before we can even touch them, we have to tick NHS guidelines, we have to tick our own policies.
Well, if you didn't have NHS guidelines, the paperwork would still be there. It would just be duplicated amongst umpteen independent private providers, and then it would be slightly different between each private provider, and then running some sort of socialised healthcare system, which I'm fairly sure you approve of, Ethan. So, if you're not really into just having healthcare for people, regardless of their ability to pay, then yes, I can understand why getting rid of all of what you would call the bureaucracy surrounding healthcare might be attractive.
If you love paperwork, we should go to the American system, because they're reams of paperwork.
Well, not just the American system,
and also
not just the American system, the French system.
And also the accountants and the insurance companies and the loss adjusters and all that kind of thing, and the $100 charge for being handed your baby that appears on the bill. I mean, that's great for paperwork. The NHS, it's a bit like democracy, isn't it? It's the worst possible system for healthcare, apart from all the others which are worse. You know.
Well, I don't know about that.
Yeah, doesn't really make a great deal of sense.
What was Taiwan's healthcare?
Right, okay, we'll move on from that one.
We'll talk about that.
Right, question about that.
It's similar, I think.
You're talking about the privatisation of more NHS services. A lot of the NHS services are run by the numeration system. So instead of it actually going back to the numeration system, when you change your gender marker, they change your NHS number, which requires a lot of change in your paperwork. Now, they change your gender marker, they change your NHS number, it requires a lot more paperwork to be reproduced, which requires you end up with 2 sets of different paperwork that you've got to sift through. So that means more paperwork. So why not take things back to ground level, renationalise more of the NHS instead of privatising it, and bring costs down instead of putting costs back up? Like, why not renationalise? Why send out more things into privatised companies? Like, the Conservatives have done really good at selling bits off to other companies. Why not bring bits back to put the costs down again?
I think you raise a good point, and it's a massive one, indeed. And when we see the idea that the private sector can fill the holes that the Tories have created in the NHS, well, where do they get the staff from? Which just creates another bigger hole. You know, it's like digging sand to fill a hole. You end up with another hole somewhere else. And of course, an agency nurse will cost the NHS 3 times salary staff.
Exactly.
And again, there is always the profit motive to take it out of there. And unfortunately, Wes Streeting is going to be the human door opener for privatisation, because he had the right idea of the solution to the waiting list is to ask NHS staff to work the weekend, because apparently you're all shut the weekend. Is that right? Or do you actually open on the weekend, mate?
My weekend started half an hour ago.
Indeed, yeah. So it is a big mess, and for all the times the NHS doesn't perform brilliantly or performs awfully, we know about that. It is potentially one of the greatest things that we've ever done as a nation. When we were absolutely broke after the Second World War, when we were on our knees, if not on our stomachs, we had the bravery to create the National Health Service, which the Conservatives voted against, of course, although it passed after they took office. But, a bit like many other legislation, it's one of the greatest things we've ever done. And while other people around the world blink at it and go, my God, that is amazing, unfortunately, not every country in the world has them. There are hybrid systems, and I'm aware of there are contributory systems which come close to the NHS. But my God, let's not go down the American route. And far too often, we end up following the Yanks, and let's not do it on this one.
I'm going to interrupt.
Please.
If you want to see a good of how the American system works, there's a comedian and social commentator called Jon Stewart. He's got a rather excellent YouTube presentation. It goes on about 10 minutes. And not only is it highly amusing, but it's highly insightful of how the American system funds a private sector system with taxes. Because not only do people pay with their insurance from their companies that they work for, they also pay via the taxes that they pay to central government. And the insurance companies pay in the middle, and they get to decide healthcare decisions, not with medical experts, but with financial tables.
I think that if we're talking about healthcare, which is great.
I can put an add-on, right?
Oh, sorry.
Right. But from a perspective of trans people and changing trans documents, I could answer your question. It's cheaper to change yours and a few people that are trans who will change their gender than it is to change the entire system from scratch. It's a price thing. It's like I was on the working party for the Condemn, and I didn't brand it the Condemn government. It was just nicknamed the Condemn government between 2010 and 2016. I was on the working group that did the work around the census for sexual orientation questions and the questions around inclusivity within, when you're talking about, you call daft questions, you ask men whether they're pregnant or not, but you don't know whether that person's trans or not. They might have a vagina, they might have a fetus sat in there waiting to grow. Just because they're got a beard and a pot belly doesn't mean it's a pot belly. It might be a little human being waiting to come through. Kind of thing. But right now, within the NHS, did you know that the North East Gender Service has closed its waiting lists?
Yeah.
Not extended them, closed them. They closed them, is it 2 years ago?
last August, wasn't it?
Last yeah.
The waiting list got to 2.5 years.
Yes, and
Yeah.
they had a number of people that they've allowed to drop in, but they're taking no new patients. At all.
Manchester or Nottingham, I think.
Yeah. The National Clinic for Trans Kids, Tavistock, which had a clinic at Leeds and a clinic in London, was closed. The government said they were going to put in a replacement service, regional services. The regional services said to the government, don't do it yet, we're not ready. The Tavistock is now closed.
Are the regional centres ready?
No!
No, of course not.
Right, that's beside the point. Right, another question. Have you got one?
I think it might have
You've got that look in your eye.
I think it would have been answered actually.
Doesn't matter.
I often hear the refrain of there's been a decline in the human rights of LGBTQIA plus people. What do you understand by this? Can you give examples? And what action will you take to address this if you are elected as Darlington's MP?
Coming back to me.
May as well.
Yeah, I think the fundamental rights to enjoy your life and to not be oppressed, not to be discriminated against, is what we fundamentally come down to. Those core human rights that Britain helped draft after the war, and much respect we were for it, and the fact that we now decided that human rights are an obstacle to running an economy and making money and getting your own way is a real concern for me. If you remember the post office scandal, how did those submasters get justice? They used Human Rights Act. It is a breakwater against tyranny. And let's remember, it's not a pie. It's not a pie. Someone getting a bigger slice of rights doesn't mean you get a smaller slice of rights. And sometimes someone's rights might make you feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes. And we're on to that thing about freedom of expression, and with that about religious expression. I'm an atheist. I don't mind people having religious faith. I don't mind people having a creed, or no creed in the case of Quakers. It's as long as they don't make a demand that infringes on my rights. So as far as the trans community, and I've said this before, my fear is the ratchet is starting to go back the other way. And all the battles we had to get us to where we are now, that the rhetoric that is being deployed by people who are worried they're going to lose power and lose influence, that's the fear of going back. And that the Badenoch and what she's been saying is that opening of the seal, and I'm really prepared to say we cannot row back on that one. We've made great progress, and the fear is that when we see, again, we talk about the United States, the people lining up behind the anti-trans community to be anti-birth control, to be anti-women's rights, and that is really, really concerning, because I have complete I'll never say I have complete understanding, but I have spoken to people who are genuinely worried about the loss of women's rights when trans rights are also there. And I can understand the tension, and I understand the fear, because women's rights were a huge battle. Women died to get women's rights, and they must not be lost either. But the idea that it's either or can never be right. And so the bastion of standing against the erosion of those rights. So your question about giving examples of, I'm not going to give you chapter and verse. I wouldn't be able to give you particular case examples of cases, but the idea that if Badenoch gets her way, we will see the erosion of trans rights. And the fact that we have at least one, or I think two parties saying that they don't believe that we should be a signatory of universal human rights, is setting the table for removal of people's rights without any recourse to prevent that happening. That was almost an answer.
Yeah, when there's any hatred or discrimination against any group of people or individuals, it should be completely called out and stamped out as well, and we should do everything we can to stop that hate and that hatred and the violence that people suffer from happening. And I feel deeply about this, because these things affect all of us, whether we're a member of a community that's threatened or whether we're not. We all live in the same society. We have to hope that that society is the kindest and nicest society that we could possibly have in this world. So I agree with that. I also think as well that we should make sure that there's accurate reporting of any hate crime incidents that happen in this country as well, so we can have a good idea of where the problems are, what the problems are, and how we can fix them as well.
Yeah, I think just to push back on the premise a little bit, I don't really see LGBTQIA rights as some distinct form of rights. You know, human rights are human rights, and this is something which we as a party have been very explicit about for a very long time. Rights apply to everybody equally, and they don't. And I feel it's important to mention this because it perhaps makes us distinct from the other parties. Rights do not accrue to communities. Rights belong to individuals. Communities do not have rights. Individuals have rights. Individuals have the right to live their lives in the way that they want to live them, and the rights are there to specifically prevent anybody from stopping any other individual from doing that. And the rights extend as far as they can without encroaching into other people's rights. And there's always going to be this space, which is an endless debate without end, really, which is how far does the rights of individual A go without encroaching on the rights of individual B? And in political theory, this is called compossibility. And as I said, it isn't something which has an answer. It is a debate, and it is something which is political. And if we're trying to find an objective answer to it, we will fail. It is ultimately a political position. And as I've mentioned, I'm a liberal, and I believe that individual rights are what matters most within our society as a whole. And what that means is the application of human rights as they extend to LGBTQ people and everybody else who is not LGBTQ, it's exactly the same. I don't see a distinction there. And so in terms of your question about how these may be getting rolled back, as Matthew says, what we have at the moment is a government which has been very happy and willing, for short-term political gain, quite honestly, to say that they will leave the ECHR if it prevents them from deporting people to Rwanda, because there is a chance that the deportation of people to Rwanda would breach their human rights. In fact, it's already been proven to do that in the original iteration of the policy. And I mean, that is a government which is pursuing a policy despite knowing full well that it goes against the principle, if not perhaps, if they can tweak it sufficiently, the actual letter of the legislation which underpins our rights, Human Rights Act. So there's a great example, and I think we are at a very dangerous point in our politics, where we risk atomizing our society into competing groups and going down the route. I don't like to mention America all that much because I really don't think we're all that similar in that respect, but in this I can see some similarities. Going down the route of what they have in America, whereby you have attacks on groups of people because it's perceived that they are getting more out of the system than others. And I completely reject that sense of rights. I think rights, as I said, individual thing, and that is what should be enforced rigorously by legal frameworks.
And the attack on the ECHR as a foreign court is just another part of this. It's
an
international court.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
It's that framing that these foreign ideas of a universality of rights is another attack. It's another deliberate weaponisation, which is why retaining membership of the ECHR is vital, and it's something that our party is fully behind. Mm-hmm. You're fully behind Lib Dem reform. Are you fully behind retaining human rights for everyone?
Retaining human rights.
No.
That was called the leading question. The question: am I against human rights?
The ECHR.
Oh, I thought you said retaining human rights for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, am I against the ECHR? Or am I against retaining human rights for everyone?
ECHR.
Like against ECHR, I've got nothing against ECHR, but I do not want us to have decisions made by them affect the people of this country. I think we're a sovereign nation. I think our politicians and our judges are perfectly capable of solving issues of any judicial nature, and we do not need to rely on an international court.
Would you
Simple.
They want to leave it, yes.
UN? UN?
UN? No.
Because they make rulings, don't they?
Yep, they do.
Simple.
No, well, not necessarily.
For the
How
ICJ.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What kind of
For the ICJ, which
Well,
is a
the
UN
UN Security Council resolutions.
But you mean the UN Security Council where the UK is a member of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you don't think UK judges can make those decisions instead?
What do you mean?
Well, yeah, the UN is a body that we're a member of. And
Yes,
it's
that's right, and we have representatives in the UN, don't we?
Yeah.
And we have judges in the
Yes,
ECHR.
yes,
You do know
yes.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the same
So-
thing, yes.
So
What I'm worried
what
about
is
is that we lose the idea of a global commonwealth, of the fact that we can, we're stronger together if we can make decisions together. They're sometimes harder, they're sometimes slower, but that idea of a common value of improving the life of all is one where you have to get down, sit around the table and have those hard conversations. If we throw a wall up and say, no, you can't talk about us to us, we make all the decisions here, that atomizes the idea, and that is where wars go up and conflicts escalate. And that is the fear. If we row back on ECHR, where does this row back stop? Where do we all isolate ourselves? And it's everyone for themselves. It becomes a zero-sum game then. If I win, you lose. Whereas the idea of collective and commonwealth is that we all win.
Yeah, don't quite accept that premise. Oh, by the way, I am absolutely for human rights, if that was just in case people didn't get that. Yes, all of them.
tempted to push back a little.
All right. We've got
Next
no
questions.
No, it's right now. I read the Reform UK contract from the business that is Reform UK. They're not a political party, and this is not pocket you. These are just things that are out there in the public domain. The Reform Party is in itself a business. It's not a political party. Now, in their contract with you, their policy, they have stated there are two sexes and two genders. It is dangerous safeguarding issue to confuse children by suggesting otherwise. No gender questioning, social transitioning or pronoun swapping, informing parents under 16s about their children's life decisions. Children's schools must have single-sex facilities. Public toilets and changing areas must provide single-sex facilities. Documents goes on to say it is unlikely of the party to win. Yeah, but Farage has already said that. But these are Tice's words. On equalities, they said they wish to leave the European Convention on Human Rights and replace the 2010 Equalities Act with a changed definition of hate crime. My question is, what changed definition of hate crime would that be?
My answer is they haven't told me.
Right, they haven't told you.
I'll find out for you and get back to you.
Right, okay. So that you won't answer it, so you don't know why they want to leave the European Convention of Human Rights.
They'd like to leave the European Convention on Human Rights because they believe we're a sovereign nation and we should make our...
Sorry, can't hear you.
They believe we should leave the European Convention of Human Rights because they believe, and we believe that we are a sovereign nation and we should make our own laws.
So, war crimes, international law, how do we stand on that?
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, that's fine because it's obviously included in our own law.
That's exactly the same.
It's not included in our law.
It's not
international
law.
The Hague.
Basically what you're saying is you don't believe in treaties.
Yeah.
You don't believe in international treaties, because every international treaty any country ever signs reduces that country's scope for action, which you would call sovereignty. So this is the lie that was Brexit, which was the UK didn't have sovereignty when it was a member of the EU. But the fact that the UK could choose to leave the EU whenever it wanted to meant that the UK did have sovereignty. And it's this, you're throwing out this word sovereignty, which with a definition which is completely inaccurate. The ECHR in no way undermines UK sovereignty because the UK has decided to join it. The UK is a sovereign body which has decided to join it. So how can it possibly undermine UK sovereignty when the UK is a voluntary member of the jurisdiction of the European Convention on Human Rights? How do these two things fit together in your mind?
Because it passes judgments that stop the sovereign government from...
But it doesn't stop the sovereign government. Firstly, the government is not sovereign. Parliament is sovereign, right? Parliament has passed legislation which means the UK is part of the jurisdiction of the European Convention of Human Rights. That is parliamentary sovereignty. That is our nation. So, how can a judgment of the ECHR undermine sovereignty? It is not logically possible, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you call
We've
up
solved
Mr.
that-
Tice
we've
and
solved
tell him
that
that we've actually solved the problem?
You certainly can, but the fact remains that we can
Please.
also leave the European Convention of Human Rights.
Absolutely,
Of course
we
you
can,
can.
yes.
Of course you can.
Yeah.
We can. And if we were not sovereign, could we do that?
Can you speak up, please?
Sovereignty is ability to make decisions.
Yeah.
The decision to join, the decision to leave is a sovereign decision.
Yes.
That sovereignty is retained.
So,
Whether we're
to
in
contrast
or
with,
out,
I think
we remain sovereign.
Perhaps I misspoke then, because taking away some of our sovereignty.
it's not taken.
No.
No, that's not. It's like being pregnant. You can't be a little bit sovereign. You can't be a little bit sovereign. You're sovereign or you're not.
Because
That's what sovereignty is.
Is Scotland sovereign?
No,
is Wales sovereign? Is
exactly.
Darlington sovereign?
Darlington absolutely is sovereign.
Yeah. So
It wishes. Right, okay, I'm going to kill that one because as much fun as I'm having. Right, you said Scotland, didn't you? Right, I've got a question about Scotland. Right,
That's relevant.
I know it's got fuck all to do with Darlington, but I've got it actually has got something to do. Right, last year the government intervened with the Scottish Government's plan for self-identity for trans people. How do you feel about this if you were to become the MP and they decided to revisit it?
Is it me first?
Is it you first?
Well, our policy is to allow self-ID without any sort of any need for medical certificate or anything like that. It's purely on the say-so of the individual concerned. So suffice to say, we did not support the UK government's decision to overrule the Scottish Parliament. Our members of the Scottish Parliament all voted in favour of the legislation, and if I'm elected, and if we have Lib Dems in government as well, we will. It's in our manifesto. We move towards full self-ID on the basis of self-recognition.
I think we could have a team of medics who've never met you, and they could be better at telling you what your gender is. We could have a system where you're forced to portray some cis vision of what a transitioned gender identity is, and then live in that. Don't wear trousers because that's not conforming to my cis view of a woman, or whatever. And you're forced to do that for a period of time. Meanwhile, at the same time, the bigoted organisation that has come up with this cruel system said, "Oh, but you can't use these facilities because we believe it's a cellular level that your gender is determined. But you need to live in that gender while we're going to beat you up for using the facilities that define that gender."
So what's the green policy, Matthew? You're just rambling. What's the green policy?
Excuse me, I was in the flow there for a second. And also your spouse could
Do you have the same policy as us?
and the spouse could veto the whole
I believe
thing.
you have the same policy as us. I've read your manifesto. I know for a fact
I just
you
didn't
have the same policy as us.
Control C, Control V, did I?
There you go. Perfect.
no.
That's what I was at first.
So we have,
I think that's something to be said.
and so the self-ID and the X marker for non-binary and the removal of the spousal veto, in summary. But come on, give me a chance.
So in terms of in a world, right, the SNP get an increased majority.
And the Greens supported them in Scotland.
Yes, I know, and I know why the Greens walked away as well. Because politics is my hobby, or one of my hobbies. And my other half hates the fact that it's one of my hobbies.
Mine too.
Every time they drop a clanger, I go, what the fuck? But that's beside the point. Within Scotland, assuming a situation where Scotland will if SNP get an increased majority, will be going for independence. They will probably push a little bit harder with the change of government around self-ID. What would your position be? You are the incumbent MP, right? What would your position be? Would you?
I agree with the Party Manifesto, which we've already explained is self-ID.
You go for self-ID. Would your position be right? Self-ID? Right.
No, we don't agree with self-ID.
Why?
We believe that it could pose a problem for safeguarding and for women's safety.
Why?
Well, because we believe that with no checks on that on self-identification, it can lead to issues where men pretend to be women and can then harm women or children.
Why do that? It's much easier to be a police officer.
This men have been abusing women for generations.
Men don't need to pretend to be women. Do you know how many cases there have been of men pretending to be women going into toilets and perpetrating harm on women?
I imagine one is too many.
Right. How many?
Is one too many or no?
Is any too many?
Right. Too many.
But the bottom line is,
because I believe that if it's one, then that woman or child who suffered, that's terrible.
But you're going to check Darlington on the way in.
We should put in place safeguarding procedures.
What does changing a gender registration have to do with that?
You're going to have genetic checks at the top of the thumbprints, XY. XXY. What am I going to do?
The entire position here, it seems to, like the Reform position and the Conservative position seems to be that trans people were invented at some point in the past 10 years.
Are you going to tell us what we think again?
Well, you're saying that the changing. Well, you tell me, right? You're saying that this legal change, right, would make it more likely or make it easier for a man who would want to abuse women to do so, right? And you've given the example of toilets. Now,
but there are other places
what
as well,
exactly, under the current legislation, the current framework that we live in this country, what would prevent a man from doing that as things currently stand? And what on earth would a legal change in someone's gender, what difference does it? It makes no difference, Michael. It literally makes no difference to the facts on the ground.
There are examples of men going into female-only spaces pretending to be women.
Yes, I'm sure there are.
Under
But
the
what
current
does the
legislation.
legal change make? What difference does
the
it make?
current legislation, which is in place now, where you have the medics I described earlier before Simon interrupted me because I was in the flow. The current legal system that we have now, which we would like to reform for, and these perpetrators do attack women. Have they been stopped by the current legal system?
Exactly.
No, they haven't.
Exactly.
What would your legal system of ignoring? What would your changes bring forward, and that would stop that? What legal changes? Because I believe you, Michael, that you want to protect women and girls against violence, and I want to protect them as well, and men and boys against violence as well, and rabbits or whatever. But you are going to propose something that's going to improve the situation and prevent violence against women and girls. And what is that change you're proposing?
The idea about safeguarding is you put in place procedures that make it less likely for these issues to happen.
Brilliant. And what is your procedure you're putting in place?
Now, by taking away the idea of self-identification, that makes it less likely for men to carry out these offences.
No, but what are you putting in place to stop it happening?
Why?
You must have a solution. What is your solution to stop it happening?
To stop men attacking
women.
Can I let you into a little secret?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Hands up.
I've got a couple of hands. I've got a slight response, and I'll come to 1, 2, 3.
Brilliant.
Right, because I'm aware. Right. I transitioned, and I lived a 50-50 role. Bear in mind, this is my daughter here. Just to prove that sort of I'm a human being and I do produce progeny. I feel small against
that's not a definition of humans.
Yeah,
there's lots of humans who have.
Yeah, I know. But right now, the fact is, before 2010, the Equalities Act brought in the second Equalities Act, because there was another Equalities Act brought in 2007 that didn't last long, because they started writing the 2010 one immediately after. But before that, trans women had been transitioning
for decades medically and had been using women's only spaces like public toilets for a long time. And I remember transitioning at work before the law changed, and I was working in Darlington for a local insurance company on the end of a telephone. And I transitioned and I had a conversation with the HR manager. Now the HR manager was on my side. It was a French company and they were very European in their policies and approaches. But the manager of the building, one Terry Bacon, you won't know who he is, so it doesn't matter, was a very English manager who basically said, can't you use the disabled toilets? The trouble is, his HR manager said, Terry, we don't have a bloody disabled toilet. That's how long ago it was, because they didn't have disabled facilities. Trans women and trans men have been using public facilities for decades. Do you know how many instances there are? And one may not be too many, but at the end of the day, one's too many in terms of police officers killing women. But that one, there's been many, many, many instances of police officers charged and dismissed in recent years. They've just come to light. They're up there on the domestic abuse perpetrators as well list, an area I used to work in. So banning self-ID is not going to change it, because we've been self-IDing for years. We've been living with you for years, using public spaces for years. It was only when it was codified in law that people started getting paranoid and fretful, and it became then a dog whistle mechanism by which certain political parties, normally from the right wing, with especially fundamentalist Christian and fundamentalist religious backgrounds, leveraging individuals within their criteria. And that was a question I was going to ask, but we're getting really close to the end. So I'm going to go to, right, you put your hand up first, you. You see, you weren't ready for that, were you? You're not quick enough, come on.
Sorry, I've listened to what you've said and I find a few flaws in your argument. I'm just curious as to how you're going to reply to them. Firstly, when it comes to the issue of opposing self-ID on safeguarding grounds, I kind of understand the logic, but I disagree for a couple of reasons. Firstly, safeguarding is about harm reduction. If you to say you can't self-ID, therefore a trans woman can't use a female facility, that puts her in a facility with me. Statistically, I am more likely to be a threat to the safety of a transgender woman than a transgender woman is to be to the safety of a cisgender woman. Secondly, it also means that any man, a cisgender man, could pretend to be a transgender man in order to access the female space that transgender men would be pushed into. So does that not undermine the entire argument? Because some transgender men look pretty butch and as masculine as I do, or more so.
I agree with this myself, by the way.
Your first point, yeah, so this is what I agree with, and I think that it's not just about protecting women, it's not just about protecting children, it's about protecting everybody. So in that first scenario, I would feel like we need to have some kind of dialogue about how we can protect trans people as well as women, as well as children. So in that respect, I would absolutely try to have some kind of engagement or dialogue with you to how best we could work around that, because there are many people in this society who are worried about this. And we've got to take their concerns as well as your concerns and try to come to some agreement on this issue. Because if we don't listen to each other, if we don't talk to each other, then we're not going to get anywhere. So I would absolutely agree with your thesis there and try to work out how we can work around that and come to some solution. I don't think there's any quick fixes regarding this, because there is a section of society that is worried about this. And we can't just forget about them. We have to take their concerns on board. Second one, cis man going into a
cis man pretending to be a transgender man going into a women's space as a transgender man, because
i.e. the opposite of what generally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, the same answer would probably come across there. That we've got to look at how best we can help everybody and protect everybody in that situation. That's what we've got to do. It shouldn't be this idea of people thinking that they're against other groups in society. We should be looking at how to protect everybody in society, and also to give everybody the rights that they have and that they freely deserve. But we've got to find a way around that, because we can't just think in one section, we've got to look at it in a whole and try to help everybody and try to make sure everybody feels safe. That's where I'm coming from regarding those things. Sorry if that didn't answer your question very well.
Half answered it.
Thank you.
But my point being is the majority of people feel safe the majority of the time, as far as I can tell, when using public spaces, even if they're gendered. So can there not be an argument made that people are allowed to use their own common sense and use the facility which they feel suits their situation, and see the gender marker on a door to a bathroom as a suggestion open to interpretation rather than a command?
Yeah. I think as well regarding bathroom, that's a very kind of it's a very easy point for me to put out there. But there are other women-only, female-only spaces that do need to make sure they remain women-only.
There is only one, and that's domestic abuse. That's domestic abuse refuges, and those refuges have safeguarding policies that cover that already.
That's great.
Yeah. We had 2 more questions.
And again, the trans women are at greater risk than this women. Right? Okay. So I saw 2 hands over there.
If you start bringing this in as a law, how are you going to police it to start with, and what's going to stop vigilantes from trying to get on board it and trying to police it themselves and actually hurting somebody?
Yeah, bringing what in, sorry, as well?
This sex space rather than gender space.
Yeah, if you try to bring this in and try to police it, like what's going to stop a vigilante from doing it and actually hurt somebody by trying to police it themselves?
Well, like everything like that, we've got to make sure that we prevent those things from happening, so that the situation you talk about there doesn't occur. And then that's through policing and through people in these refuges and these shelters from getting together and making sure that those situations don't happen in the way that we've been talking about. But in regards to what you say, how do we stop any kind of crime happening? It's a difficult situation really to get it going. I mean, how do we stop shoplifting? How do we do other things like that? We've got to make sure that as a society we understand that there are people in this society who are worried about things. Trans people, straight people, gay people, all kinds of people are worried, and we've got to make sure that all voices are heard regarding this and make sure that everybody is protected.
I mean, the crucial issue, though, with what you're talking about here is it wasn't a problem until right-wing political parties made it a problem.
It was a
problem on purpose.
I mean, I find it very difficult to talk about because I'm not female, so I find it very difficult to voice what women have told me about this situation.
It's a hint. There's more than just trans females.
As well.
Yeah,
we should
non-binary as well.
But regarding what you said there about it not being a problem, I feel like I don't like it when men say that about what women are feeling. If women are telling me that there is a problem with that, then as an MP, or hopefully to become an MP, we've got to listen to these people. We can't just say, oh, it's only a problem now because far-right people are involved. That's so lazy.
Well,
I mean, you can't
say that if it's true,
but you can't ignore these women who feel that way, can you?
Yeah. Well, no, it's not a question of ignoring people the way people feel. It's a question of looking at the consequences, right? The consequences of either allowing everybody to live their lives in the way that they want to live them, or to come in, as you propose to do, as a political party, and enforce people to live their lives in particular boxes, regardless. No, that's literally what you're saying. You've literally said that. You're saying that's what your manifesto says. You're saying that regardless of the distress that may cause individual human beings, that is what they have to do because you have decided that is what their life should be.
So you say about
so these two things are not equal. We're not talking about two equal political positions here. This is, as I said before, it's politics, right? This isn't about objective right and wrong. We're having a debate here, right? We have different visions for what the country should be like. And quite frankly, the idea that you can say, well, we should just respect everyone and all the rest of it, when you're coming in here and saying, no, actually, we have decided, and we see this in your education policy as well, where you said you're going to mandate what you call patriotic education, right?
Again, okay. Right, I'm gonna.
We can talk about that.
Just gonna pull that up. Right.
Yeah. You just touched on it slightly, but what I was going to say was, domestic violence is actually right. You do not need, a man does not need to dress up as a woman to abuse another woman. Mm-hmm. And also, why are you focusing on trans women? Why is it always? It's not just like you said. It's not just trans women. Yeah. Women abuse men as well. Yeah. Yeah. Why is the focus just on trans women?
Well, I mean, just because these were the questions I was getting, but yeah, I absolutely agree with you completely. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I came here was to listen to you and learn something from you. That's one of the reasons, because it's not, I don't often get out very much, so it's nice to come down here. You don't get noise. This is a nice thing, but that is one of the reasons why I came here, and I do, and this is what I'm trying to get across. The point I'm trying to get across is that
Karen, I am really happy to educate anyone, and I mean educate. I mean, I spent 2 hours with the guy from UKIP 2 elections ago. Cannot remember the fucker's name.
was he called Kevin, but he's transitioned to be called Monty now?
Might be.
Yeah.
But
we don't dead name him.
We had a long conversation, but that's beside the point. Right now, I am fully aware we have run over. We have run over. There are multiple questions. Now, we've captured most of the questions, haven't you? Apart from some of the daft shit that I said. But right, I've got one question for you all, and it's a bit personal about this. How many hustings have you been invited to?
Shut up, man. He's not a liar.
Invited to all of them, yes.
You got 3.
How many?
There was this one.
I was invited to 4. One was cancelled.
The gold one.
The gold one cancelled.
Yeah, that got cancelled.
And so I've been invited to this one,
yeah.
The Churches Together, and the schools one.
I didn't go to the schools one.
I've not been invited
to the schools.
I think they're doing. Well, I'm going to Poland.
Well, that's not hustings.
Well, it's one. We're going one at a time, aren't we?
Yeah, that's not hustings. Right, fine. Don't scare me. No, that's fine. That's not hustings.
Right,
so just 2.
I remember back in the day that sort of there was a race one. There was one on
environment one,
churches and environment one. There was a women's
one. Election this time.
You know, and it's a 6-week election.
Labour and the Tories just won't turn up.
We need the fixed parliament back.
Yeah, and it's
plenty of to the choir.
I'm just saying. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to wind this up because.
I think you're very good at winding people.
I'm just going to get irate and really pissed off at parties that haven't attended and the excuses they've used. Knocking on doors is not right. It's when you knock on the door of an individual and you ask them, what do you think's going on? You don't tell a complete stranger that A, you're gay, you're a victim of hate crime. But the fact is right now there's been an increase in hate crime, there's been an increase in discrimination, there's been an increase in toxic behaviour online in social media and in real world. The LGBT community is not a community as such, but it's a group of people that have been put under pressure by the media. And as a result, in social media, I've been set apart and been viewed to be a group that are set to be a target by different groups because they used to highlight difference because they're not like you. And that is what is happening within this election. There's always somebody, the small boats. Not going to go there. This is not an immigration one. But the bottom line is, with something like this, the fact that they don't want to bother turning up, I worry that the Labour Party are just trying to sleepwalk themselves into position by not saying anything. And I can actually hold my hand up and say, I worked with Keir Starmer when he was CPS, in charge of the CPS. I have no idea who this Lola McAvoy is. I knew Jen Chapman. I knew Milburn. They actually spoke to us as people. They came and talked to us. I've no idea who Lola McAvoy is. And at the end of the day, this is an opportunity. This has been captured and it will be reported. It will be stuck out and sent out to the press. The questions asked will be sent to the people who aren't here. You got something?
Just on that subject, why did they choose not to come to this one but to go to the
The churches together one.
But when you consider that the last census said 1.5 million UK people over 16, 1.5 million people identify as LGBTQI. But
only 675,000 people go to church every day.
654,000.
Yeah, I know the
Go
numbers.
to church once a week.
Yes. And it's your question. Yeah.
I was just going to say, you are all invited to go to that churches together one, so please do pop along on Thursday to the
There are a lot of people that don't feel safe.
Oh really? Well, I'll check it. That's fine.
One person doesn't, I'm afraid.
By not feeling safe, because I am a heterosexual woman, so maybe I haven't got the skin in the game to be here, but I felt welcome to come here.
Such a history of faith-based bigotry
And conversions.
and we didn't touch on conversion therapy here, but there's such a history.
I think that's why Peter's not coming.
I get an awful lot of people coming to me saying, I'm a Christian trans person, I'm a Christian gay man. I'm saying, I need a church where I feel welcome. There was one church regionally called the MCC, which I don't know if it's still based in Newcastle, but I think it's closed down. I send people to the Quakers because the Quakers actually have a long history of actually not giving a shit.
Holding people in the light, I think you call it.
That's it, yeah. Now, as someone who is probably as extreme an atheist as you can possibly get, can you have an extremist atheist?
Evangelical atheist, something.
They're very welcome at Quakers.
Yes, quite possibly. I mean, a lot of my friends are Quakers. I mean, wherever, and a lot of my friends are priests, bizarrely enough, from various faiths, because it's almost like saying, we want to get your soul, but you're fucking not, because I've not got one. Right, now, this has been messy ending. I'm not very good at endings. But Jane's got a comment.
I've got another question, but I will email it to you all. It's about prisons. So I will email you that.
There's a kettle of fish.
Yes, that's too much to unpack right now. But I will email it to you all. Could you send me answers back?
And if anybody else has any questions that you haven't got asked today, I'm more than happy to answer by email. And
absolutely,
and they'll be available.
Now,
thank you. I was going to say, can we have a round of applause for people organising?
Thank you. I hope you've been entertained and actually found politics interesting. Because at the end of the day, I find politics interesting, except when I watch it on the BBC or on ITV or on Sky News or that, what's that godforsaken fucking channel?
GB News.
GB News, that's it. Tom TV, that's the other one. Julia Brewer-Hartley, Jesus wept. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you.